All right. Hello, everyone. I just wanted to make another quick video, or hopefully it's quick. That's my plan, is to make it quick, but essentially about like how to get into trucking for people who are interested in trucking. So a lot of people ask like, what are trucking companies that'll take people with no experience? What's the best way to get in trucking? So on and so forth. And ultimately, it really depends on your location. In my area, there's not really many places that accept new people. You have to have experience, and you can't have a automatic restriction. So the number one thing I say is go to a trucking school that is not through a trucking company. So, like the Midwest Truck Driving School, for example, and do a CDL trucking school with manual. So, always do a standard transmission because then it opens up your possibility. And if you do have a auto restriction, maybe think about removing that auto restriction. You don't even have to do it in a tractor trailer. You could do it in a class B. And as long as it's with the manual, you're fine. So that's like the number one thing is try to keep your job availability wide open and don't have a limit with like what you can have. So always do it with a manual if you can. Otherwise, the big over the road companies, if you're interested in doing something like that or going to a trucking school at like a trucking company, you could go that route, but it's not necessarily the best option. Um, Obviously, there's things like CR England, which I would stay away from. Swift does a decent training program, um, but ultimately, what I would recommend is going through a trucking school that will teach you in a manual so that you have a standard transmission. So then you're not over here looking for a company and they say, well, we want you to have manual experience or no auto restriction. And there's even some companies that don't even know that there's auto restrictions, which isn't too common, but that is the case with some smaller companies in local areas. Is sometimes they don't even know that that's the case, so then they try to hire you on, and you get into your truck, and you're like, oh, uh, what's this stick doing here? Um, I trained in an auto. It's just a flip of a switch. I don't know how to drive this. And then you have to find another trucking company, which hopefully that doesn't happen to anyone. So yeah, I mean that would be the number one thing is that. But if you do want to go to a big carrier after something like that, I mean, sure, go ahead if you want to. But honestly, what I would do is go LTL, less than truckload. And there's carriers that'll take you if you're a recent grad. So if you graduate just right when you graduate, start applying to those companies, like Cisco, for example, which I don't really know if Cisco would be the correct route. Um, Maybe US Foods, perhaps. The problem I have with Cisco is they don't even let you have a hands free device. So, like, let's say you're working, right? And you know you're going to be getting a phone call and it's going to be an important phone call. If you're driving or working, you can't use even a headset, even if it's hands free. Uh, they'll literally fire you for that. They have driver facing cameras specifically for that. So that's one big negative to them. But there's companies like that. There's companies like US Foods. There's companies like XPO Logistics, both XPO Logistics. You could also be loading your own trailers and not just unloading your trailers because LTL, you unload your trailers, but you could also load your trailers. But things like that could be paying you $30, $40 an hour, depending on the location you're in. Like, for example, I was looking in Orlando, Florida, and there was one that was hiring for 33 an hour, and then another one hiring for 37 an hour, somewhere around there. XPO was the one hiring at 37. Cisco was at 33, and Cisco was at 33 because you only unload. XPO pays you more because you also load. And that could also mean you could become a dock worker if you don't have a whole lot of work going on at that moment. So that would be the route that I would say to get into if you want to go into trucking. It's still decent work if you are into that, but it's good pay. It's hourly pay. You don't have to really worry about miles too much. It's more about the hours you work and being efficient at unloading trailers and getting those good runs, essentially. Because things like Coca-Cola, for example, you're working there and they give you loads based off of seniority. So if you have a 1 month of experience or something like that, they're going to give you all those shank runs that no one wants. And then they're going to give the more experienced drivers the runs that they want, the good runs. And it's also a as is basis. Like you go there, you pick your load, hand pick your load based on experience. If you have the most experience, you pick first, and then it goes down the list until the least experience. And your option could be only 1 or 2 loads. So, I mean, things like that might be a little bit of a gripe for you. I'm not sure. Some people like that. Some people don't. Some people are like, I want to work up in the company. And if that's part of working up, then I want to do it. For me personally, I don't want to do that. But then if you don't want to do LTL, there's also over the road. You could do over the road with a company like Swift and get your experience and then leave after a year. You could do it through Werner if you find a decent account, but Werner is one of those more hairy companies. So I'm not too sure if I would recommend that. You could even go through like Rail. They do like new graduate training or whatever. So they have like their own mentors for people who just got out of CDL school. But if you got out of CDL school and you got hired onto a company and you've been with that company for a month or two, they're not going to hire you. You have to be fresh, like fresh. So that would be another option. Something like that. Rel is going to be a little bit more micromanaging. Swift will be less micromanaging. If you're new, there's going to be a little bit more micromanaging than if you were experienced. But once you get that like 4 to 6 months of experience, sometimes depending on driver leaders, like 2 months of experience, then they kind of leave you alone, especially if you're getting miles and you're doing everything they ask and you're working hard and being pretty efficient. If you want OTR, that's an option. Otherwise, other local options would be non-LTL. Maybe you want to do bus. You could do CDLB with that. Maybe you want to do like dump truck. You could do CDLB with that. Maybe you want to work for the city and do trash truck. That's CDLB as well. You get paid hourly. You're home every night. You have more set schedule, like at least with waste management here in my area. It's like I think it was 27 an hour or something like, oh no, 23 an hour. To 25. And I mean, that's not too bad if you're just starting off. They hire people who don't have experience. They hire people with auto restrictions and without auto restrictions because they have autos and manual, which is just your standard transmission. But yeah, I mean, those are some of the options. There's also I have some questions here. Some people ask like what companies are hiring. Most people are asking that as like an OTR sense, which would be things like Swift. I would not necessarily recommend that. But honestly, it really depends entirely on your zip code, what you want to haul, your job type, and so on. For something like that, you could go to cdljobs.com and filter it based on your zip code, your trailer type, job types, local, over the road, so on and so forth. But then also, another big question that people have when they're coming into the trucking industry is like the amount of jobs in the industry. And as far to my knowledge, I think it was based in 2018, there were just under 2 million jobs. I think that's like a growth of 5% that they have between then, which is 2018, and 2028. And people tried to say that there's a shortage of truck drivers, which honestly, I don't see that. Given there's a freight shortage, there's definitely not a trucker shortage. But yeah, I would say that would be my number one things is obviously no auto restriction for number one. And then for number two, I would try to, unless you're interested in doing it, stay away from OTR and try local, because nowadays local you could get local jobs with no experience whatsoever. And I would try for LTL companies because that's usually how you get paid more. That's more consistent. So things like XPO Logistics, Cisco, US Foods, whatever else it might be. And yeah, I mean, those are the number one things, in my opinion, on how to get into trucking, and if it's a good option for you, honestly. And really, that kind of just depends on the type of person you are. Everyone is different. So, anyway, if you have any more questions, feel free to ask in the comments.